So in this in this chapter, we see that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is going to take the nation of Israel into captivity. So what's going on in history is, as far as logistically, or when you look at a map, you see that Egypt is down here, and then you have Israel, like here's Egypt, here's Israel, then Babylon is over here. And so Pharaoh, king of Egypt, invades Babylon. They're going to war. So when that happens, when they came to invade Babylon, Babylon met them out at Carchemish, and they fought, and Babylon won. So that was a very important battle, the battle at Carchemish. And when that happened, because of that, as Pharaoh in Egypt was retreating, they chased them down to the desert region of the Sinai Peninsula. And as they went down there, Nebuchadnezzar, he understood that he needed to take, it would be very wise of him to take Jerusalem and Judea, and that to be able to occupy that area to have control of that region, so that they could have troops over there right next to Egypt. So that's why all of this is happening, because of the battle that was going on between Babylon and Egypt, as Egypt invades them but gets defeated at Carchemish. And so now as they were fleeing, Nebuchadnezzar them chased them down, and so then he came up against Jerusalem and Judea. So that's what we see in this chapter. Now we know that in the last chapter we looked at, when Josiah had revival in the nation, and for some reason we talked about when he went and fought with, and in fact we looked at, I think it just covered it kind of quickly because the chapter was long. But in last week, in chapter 23, where it says, in chapter 23, verse 28, says, "Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him, and he slew him at Megiddo when he had seen him." And so some people have asked the question, why did he even get involved with this battle? And no one really knows why. He just got involved with it, and it cost him his life. So, but the thing about Josiah, which is interesting, is he knew that the message of Jeremiah was already that the nation was going down because of the rebellion of the people, because they worshiped false gods. There came a time period where it was too late. And he knew that it was inevitable that the nation was going to go downhill. They were going to be taken captive, but he still did all that he could to have revival, which is a message to us. We know that at some point, everything is going down. We know that this world is going down. We know that there's going to come a time where this world is going to be burned up and destroyed. And we as believers know that the rapture is coming. But until then, we can still have revival. We can still see a lot of good things happen. And so knowing what was inevitable didn't stop Josiah from doing what he thought was right. It's just he got sidetracked. And as it says in the Bible, he was meddling and got involved with a battle that really wasn't his. And he ends up, it cost him his life. And sometimes we can get involved with things that may be not bad in and of itself, but it's needless. It's a distraction, and it can cost us. And it cost him. So after that, now then it talks about Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 24, verse 1, coming against Israel or Jerusalem. "In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years." So it doesn't describe the battle and all of that, but Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem, and made Jehoiakim his puppet king. So when Babylon invaded Jerusalem, what Nebuchadnezzar would do and what they would often do is they would leave a king there or a leader there, and that would be the king, but this king would be subservient to Nebuchadnezzar. So he was like a puppet king. So Nebuchadnezzar would still control him, but he was still the one that was going to keep order in the nation. But the problem with Jehoiakim is he thought, you know what? I'm not going to listen to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. What happened is Nebuchadnezzar was there. They already knew the message was that the nation is going into captivity. You're just going to have to take it. I'll say, you just got to take it like a man. You got to just take it like the nation that God has, that he's told you you are, a nation that is going into captivity. Just accept it. The damage is done. You're going into captivity. That was already the message. But you had King Jehoiakim not willing to accept that, and so he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was there when they first came to Babylon. When they first got there, it was not long and when he got word that his father died. So he had to leave Judea and go all the way back to Babylon to be able to take the throne. So he had to make sure he kept order in Babylon, that he was to secure his position as the next ruler. So he leaves, and we're talking like I don't know how long it took him, but he traveled 500 miles in like 10 days to get back, and that's fast for the way they had to travel back then. So when he goes back there to get everything in order, that's when Jehoiakim is there, and he's like, I'm not going to listen to this guy. And so he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. And when that happens, that did not make God happy, because the punishment was already in. They were supposed to be subservient. They were supposed to be submissive to Babylon. That was the message. And God's people, even though they were rebellious and even though they did all these things against God, they could not take the punishment, the consequences. Just like you remember when Cain slew Abel, and then the consequences were dished out, and he says, the punishment is more than I can bear. That's like someone when the judge says, okay, now, if you do this, if you meet the needs of your probation, then you will be able to remain free, or you'll be able to remain out in the public. You don't have to be incarcerated. But if you violate the terms of probation, then you're going to have to come back to prison. And so then they violate it, stand before the judge, and they say, give me another chance. And the judge says, I already told you. But they don't want to accept the consequences. That's what was happening to the nation. We've seen that also when you read the book of Ezekiel. So this time period matches the time period of Ezekiel in some ways. It's not that far yet, because they're just being taken in the first deportation. It was 3 waves of attack that the Babylonians did to Judea, or to Jerusalem. This is the first wave. And so in the first wave, when Nebuchadnezzar leaves, he has to leave in a hurry, so he only takes a few people with him. And we know who one of the first ones taken was, right? Daniel. And so there was just Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or to use their Hebrew names, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were taken with Daniel, just a few of them, and some of the treasures, that they had in the temple. So he takes those and flees, and then that's when Jehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, which was not wise. Now, if you remember in the book of Ezekiel, the glory of God which resided in the temple, in the book of Ezekiel, we know when Ezekiel was taken during the second deportation. So the first one, Daniel was taken. And the second one, Ezekiel was taken along with 10,000 others. So that's the bulk of the people that was taken in the second deportation. When they were taken, Daniel had already been there for several years. And when Daniel was there, he was ministering or speaking to those in the inner court. Ezekiel's job was to minister to the captives that were out by the Kibar River, which was like a drainage canal off of one of the main rivers of Babylon. You had the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and you had these drainage canals. So they were there, and that's when Ezekiel was given the vision. And when he sees this vision, it's the vision that God has given to him. He sees the glory of God. If you remember Ezekiel chapter 1, with all the wheels, and the eyes, and the wheels within the wheels, and the chariots, and the cherubim with their four faces. And when you see that, when he sees the vision of the glory of God, he's puzzled because he's thinking, why is the glory of God in Babylon? The glory of God resides in the temple. And the idea, their thought was that God was confined to that temple, and as long as God was with them, no one could destroy them. And so they took that for granted, that that's God's house. That's where God was, confined to, in a sense. But nothing confines God. And so when they started worshiping the false gods, God left. And they were taken captive, and so God goes into captivity with his people. So when Ezekiel is by the Kibar River, he sees the vision, and that's the message that Ezekiel is supposed to give to the people. And the vision is that they were shown why this happened. Because they were told, okay, number one, either God was done with us, or God was defeated by our enemies. They needed to know, why are they taken captive? What had happened? I mean, they should have known. But they were confused. So God gives them the message through the prophet Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel is a priest, and this happens on Ezekiel's 30th birthday. And when a priest turns 30, that's when he begins his ministry. So can you imagine if you're always looking for that day where you're gonna serve in the temple? You're taught about it as you were growing up, that you're a priest. This is what you're gonna do one day, and you're training. You have the older priests that were retired training you, telling you what you're going to do, and you're ready to take your place. And then when the time comes for you when it's your 30th birthday and you're supposed to minister as a priest, you're taken captive. So now he's 30, and he's not beginning his ministry as a priest, but he is in Babylon by the Kibar River with the captives. So God gives him the vision. And the message was, and telling them why they were here. They were accused of violating and breaking the covenant that they made with God. And there was a warning that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. The temple is going to be destroyed. But God is not. But there's also a message of hope that God is not finished with his people. And he is going to bring them back. And they're going to he's going to make a new covenant with them. He's going to give them a new heart. And then there's going to be a new temple. It's going to be even better. So there was a message of hope that God is not done with them. But there were other false prophets there that was saying, oh, no, we're not going to lose this. Right now, we're winning. Everything's going well. We're going to go back home soon. And Ezekiel saying, no. They're going to be there for 70 years. There's going to be a lot that has to happen before they're able to return. And then also there's going to be, there's going to be a time where, while they were there, when he was first given that message, that the temple was going to be destroyed, and the people could not accept that. How could the temple of God be destroyed? And so in the book of Ezekiel, if you remember, the refugee comes with the message to tell Ezekiel that it's happened. Jerusalem has been destroyed, and the temple has been flattened. So the first invasion, though, was Nebuchadnezzar coming at this time, what's mentioned here. And Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children, just a few people are taken, a few of the treasures. Nebuchadnezzar goes back to Babylon, and while he's there, it says in verse 1, then he turned and rebelled against him. So Jehoiakim rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. They're supposed to just take the consequences that God had given to them. In verse 2, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants, the prophets that already said was going to happen, particularly Jeremiah, who was a major prophet. So God wasn't happy with Jehoiakim in that he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, because God was using Nebuchadnezzar to be basically a disciplinarian rod to his people. And so Jehoiakim, although he was, I guess you could say, a nationalist or a patriot, and he was in favor of Jerusalem and Judea, but God was not happy with what he did, and so God sent all of these bands of men. So we know that Nebuchadnezzar's army was made up of several nations who were willing to fight under the banner of Babylon. And so these bands of the Chaldees, Syrians, Moabites, and children of Ammon, they came and they went and invaded and destroyed Jerusalem at this time. Verse 3. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight. Why? Why did he do this? For the sins of Manasseh. Who was Manasseh's father? Do you remember? He should have died, remember? But he didn't. Hezekiah. Oh, look, Luke knew. Right on. Hezekiah, remember he begged God for 15 more years, and when God gave him those 15 more years, he had a child named Manasseh. And look at what the damage that Manasseh did. So this happened for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. And innocent blood, that refers to children. And we know that he caused his own son to be sacrificed to a false god, right? And imagine how many others did that. The king does that. And just think how many people have influenced many in our country to kill innocent babies in abortion. Do you think God is just going to look over, and just ignore that? Well, he said that they were taken into captivity because of what Manasseh did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. And our nation has shed innocent blood. We have leaders in our nation that have passed legislation to shed innocent blood. I think it was in Oregon, or not exactly sure what state. And the legislator of that state, all they wanted to do is pass a bill stating that if a child is born alive, and this is what they're talking about, if a child is aborted but survives, then that child would be guaranteed medical attention. That child has a right to medical attention. That's all they're trying to pass. And that legislator, they turned it down. They voted against it. And every single Democrat, without not even one going against the majority of Democrats, they all voted against that bill. They said no for an innocent baby that survives an abortion. Now, they didn't even say survive, but they're knowing what that means, because that's just saying that any child deserves the right to medical attention. So they know that the idea is if there's an abortion and the baby survives, that child should receive medical attention. And they said no. Can you imagine how wicked of a country to say no to an innocent newborn baby that they say does not deserve any medical attention? That's wicked. And that's the kind of leaders we have in our nation today. In fact, I just heard in another state, well, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it just gets sickening, some of the things that goes on in our country. And our currency says, in God we trust. Which God is that we're trusting in, where we're not even going to say that we should give medical attention to an innocent baby? And then just to allow, some people are claiming that the last election, the midterm elections, and I'm not saying like I'm Republican over Democrat. I vote Christian. It's just that I've not seen Democrat in I don't know how many years that seemed anywhere near a Christian that would back up the Bible. I mean, I don't know what they are, what they claim to be as far as if they're a born-again Christian or not. But whatever the case is, I've not seen a politician that was willing to stand against abortion in how many years? You don't even hardly find Republicans that are willing to say that. And I remember the last debate when Trump was debating against Hillary Clinton, he made some pretty strong statements against abortion. And there's going to be a lot of pressure in this next election. But the midterm elections, it came down to one issue. The Democrats threw one issue out, and the issue was abortion, because the Supreme Court just reversed the Roe versus Wade that was a court precedent. They reversed it, and everyone was celebrating, including, we was happy to see that was reversed. But the Democrats used that as a rallying point to say, now, if it's taken out of the federal government, it's going to be given to the states. So now we need to make sure all these states have legislators and those that are in the Congress of the different states or House of Representatives, that they need to be in favor of abortion. And that's what their one issue was. One issue. And because of that one issue, they did a lot better than people thought they were going to do. I mean, the campaign basically came down, the midterms, to that one issue. And a lot of people are saying the same thing is going to happen in this one. That's what they're going to start bringing up. It's going to come down to that one issue. And isn't it sad that in our country, and a lot of the colleges, a lot of the college students, they're being brainwashed by these progressive liberals, and they're taught all these progressive ideas that a child in his mother's womb is not a child. And that mother has the right, or that woman has the right to kill that baby. And a lot of people are saying it's coming down to that. Well, in here we see that one of the things that's brought up, that the nation was taken captive, or what's happening to them right now, the chastisement they're experiencing, the consequences, because of the innocent blood that was shed. So verse 5. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin his son reigned in his stead. And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river of Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. So you see, the nation of Babylon is beginning to rise, and it's going to become a world power, of course. So Nebuchadnezzar intended to take Jehoiakim to Babylon, and had him he was going to be taken bound to Babylon. But when we read Jeremiah 22:19, it tells us that he was disgracefully buried outside of Jerusalem, and he was given the burial of a donkey, basically. He was disgraced in his death, in his burial. So 2 Chronicles states that Nebuchadnezzar bound him in fetters to carry him to Babylon, but does not say he was taken all the way there. He may have been released after, at some point, and then, of course, died and was buried in that way. Verse 8. So, the first, I'll give you the points. The first, verse 1 is defeat. Verse 1 through 7, defeat. Of course, that's because of Babylon. Defeated them. Destroyed, verse 18 through 16. And then the last point is dethroned. They're no longer governing themselves. They're going to be in captivity. Verse 8. Verse 8 through 16. Destroyed or destruction. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. Now, I've had someone ask me this, and sometimes things like this does come up. It says in verse 8, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign. Now, if you look at 2 Chronicles 36, verse 9, it says that Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he became king. So, this really sometimes confuses people. They say, hey, is this a contradiction? Now, you can read some commentaries and they'll say it was a scribal error. That there was an error and he wasn't 18, but he was 8. He was 8 years old and not 18, or vice versa. That one of the entries was a mistake. And I wouldn't say that. Now, even if there was a scribal error here, that the king was either 18 or 8, would that be enough to stress you out? Is that a serious? But this is what, when it comes down to what some people will say is, they'll say errors, or some people will say there's, how do they word it? But there's variances or differences in the text when it comes to things like this. Like the stalls of horses for Solomon. Was it 50,000 or 5,000? One place it says 5,000, one place it says 50,000. Is that going to stress you out? 5,000 or 50,000? So you say, well, why is it different? There's several places like that I can think of. And here's one of them. So I'd say this. I don't know why it's different, but it could be that in one place it says he began to reign, right? In another place it says he became king. So maybe he became the king at 8, but because he's young, he has advisors that's making all of the decisions. So he doesn't begin to make the decisions. He doesn't actually reign until he's 18. So I don't know if that's the answer, but there's going to be a lot of things that you and I aren't going to know in the Bible. We're not going to be able to get to the bottom of everything. There's some things that God doesn't reveal to us. And God gives everybody the opportunity. If you don't want to believe it, don't believe it. But it's not because the Bible doesn't make sense. Why don't you put some of the ancient writings through the same test and see how many variances and how many differences? There's no other book that has been scrutinized and tested and run through all kind of cross-references and tests that the Bible has. And yet it stands up to the test of time. So I don't know why one says 8 and one says 18, but there's a reason for it. And it's not an error. Just like the stalls of horses. Maybe he had 50,000 stalls, but only 5,000 of them had horses. So one doesn't count the rest. I don't know. But that's, when it comes to things like that, don't let that stress you out. But when they say that the Bible has like 50,000 errors in it, usually what they're saying is like, let's say if I had a typo in this handout, and I passed out like 50 copies, would you say that's, and there's one error, and I passed out 50 copies on the same handout, would you say that's one error or that's 50 errors? One. Well, they would say 50. That's how they count it. They would say 50. They really exaggerate. And it comes down to things like this: 8, 18, stalls of horses, or even as minute as Jesus Christ, Christ Jesus. Yeah, even that bad. Okay, so verse 8. His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. Verse 9, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers, and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. So there were 3 invasions, I guess you could say, and 3 deportations. The first one was when they were pursuing Egypt, and they said, we need to take Jerusalem. So he went over there, and he was there for a short period of time, and they took Daniel, Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, or forget all their names sometimes. So Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children, and a few of the treasures. When he comes back, and of course Jehoiakim he rebelled against him, he paid the price, and he is not even given a proper burial. He's taken to Babylon. Along the way, at some point, he died, and that's what happened to him. So now, in the second deportation, when Nebuchadnezzar came back, he takes with him Ezekiel and 10,000 others, and a lot of the treasures. I guess all the rest of the treasures on the second deportation. Now, Ezekiel is taken into captivity, and remember I was talking about the book of Ezekiel, that prophecy, and all of that happens during that time period of that second invasion. Nebuchadnezzar or the Babylonians come back and besiege the city, and then they destroy it, and that is the last deportation, and then the rest are taken, or they're just the poor, only the very poor remnant. Those that were poor were left behind in the city, and that's it. And then the word gets to Ezekiel what had happened when the refugee comes there and says and gives the message that Jerusalem has been destroyed and the temple has been flattened. So there is 3 invasions. The last one, of course, being 586 BC, and that's the date normally given where Jerusalem fell. It was completely destroyed and depopulated at that time, and the temple was destroyed, and just a small remnant was left. So verse 13, and he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem and all the princes and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths, none remained, save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. So those are the different stages of the captivity. In verse 17, dethroned. Verse 17 through 20. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. And so the Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, makes this person king, Zedekiah, but that's his puppet king. He's in control of him. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And so we see that from this point on, and we see one more chapter in chapter 25, and then we will complete the book of 2 Kings. So it ends in a very sad note that the nation of Israel is taken captive to Babylon. And the message that Ezekiel has, of course, if you are a captive, taken captive to Babylon, you're sitting there, after making that difficult trip, being chained up with hooks in your jaws, just carried across that far journey to a captive land, yet God still had a message of hope for them, that he's not done with his people. And when you read the book of Ezekiel, you see there's going to come a time period where God was going to resurrect the nation of Israel again. He's going to put them back together. And we know that some people will believe this, that the book of Ezekiel is just talking about the nation of Israel coming back after the 70-year captivity. But the way it describes it with the millennial temple, we know that temple in Ezekiel is not that's not the temple that they built when they came back. That the millennial temple is a completely different temple. So some people say that it is just symbolic. And they'll say that all the teachings of Ezekiel is literal, but then when it comes to Ezekiel 40, that it's all symbolic. And that's not normally how the Bible is. That you have literal teachings, and then all of a sudden it becomes all symbolic or all allegory. That the temple in Ezekiel chapter 40 is not a literal temple. But Ezekiel 40 is taking us all the way into the millennial kingdom. That there's going to come a day where the nation of Israel is going to be dead. The nation of Israel after AD 70. Because, see, God's message in the Bible, he keeps saying the same message over and over again. And the prophecies that he says happens and is fulfilled in a certain amount of years. And then there's prophecies that extends beyond, way past us into the future. And we know that these prophecies are going to be fulfilled because the prophecies that were stated already had been fulfilled. So we know in the book of Ezekiel that there's going to come a time period, and if you were living in the early 1900s, there were people that said that the nation of Israel is going to come back to life, and there were people that said, no, that's just allegory. And then in 1948, what happens? It comes back to life, which is a fulfillment of Ezekiel 37 that speaks of the dry bones, where God asks Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says, thou knowest, to the Lord. You know if it can or not. And of course, the Spirit of God came through, and those bones were put back together, right? And it became an army. The nation was resurrected. And then God also said that when the people of the land return to the land, that the land will be resurrected, and it's going to bloom like a rose. And that which was desolate is going to bloom like a rose. And we know that Mark Twain testified in the late 1800s that the nation of Israel was so desolate that they did not see anything living for days when they walked. When they marched through the land, they said there was nothing there. That's why when people start talking about the occupation, I'm like, just look at history. The Palestinians weren't there. There were some people there, but there wasn't a large group of Palestinians. They weren't even called Palestinians. They weren't called Palestinians till Yasser Arafat gave that name, Palestinians. And Palestine wasn't even the name of Israel until the Roman emperor, what's his name? I can't think of his name. But he named it Palestine as a rebuke to the nation of Israel. And so now the Palestinians are saying that this is their land. From when? These Arabs that are there, they're from Jordan. That's their land. That's where they were from. They were kicked out of the land from the leader of the King Hussein kicked them out. And that's why they're there. They're making up this a made-up story. And the land was given to the Jews. God gave it to them. And it was also given to them in the Balfour Declaration. It's their land. And so God says in the book of Ezekiel that they're going to be resurrected as a nation, and that the land is going to blossom like a rose. And when you go to Israel, as I've been there twice, it's a beautiful land. It has developed and it has bloomed, and the agriculture of the nation is amazing. I mean, they feed a bunch of, the amount of produce they produce, they feed a major part of Europe. They're one of the biggest exporters of flowers, of fruits, vegetables, and all kind of products. And God has blessed the nation. And now, look, they're a world power. They're a world power. They're a little tiny nation. They probably rank in the top 10 militarily. Economically, they're a very powerful nation. The only reason why these surrounding nations like Iran and these Iranian proxies don't destroy them is because Israel is too strong. Otherwise, they would. So we see that God spoke about all of that happening, and it's happened. So if that happened, why would we deny that chapter 40 to 48 is not going to happen literally like that? That there's going to be one day a new temple. That the things that God had originally started in the Old Testament, when the nation of Israel was at its zenith under King Solomon. And when you go to Israel, they have like they show you a video of how things were done in the nation when things were running right. And it is amazing to see just how clean everything looks, how organized everything was, and just how happy the people seemed just depicting it in this video. And how they did everything according to what God wanted. And then, of course, Solomon goes south. He ends up messing up. And then from that point on, the nation went downhill. Well, it is going to be redone with the nation of Israel, with God giving them a new heart. And now, in the millennial kingdom, we're going to see things are going to be done correctly. And you and I, who will be raptured, or if we die before the rapture, and we are going to come back with him at the end of the tribulation period, and we're going to rule and reign with him during this millennial time, this millennial kingdom of 1,000 years, and things are going to be restored to how they were. Now, if the Bible says that in Ezekiel 40 through 48, why would we not take it literal? So, the book of Ezekiel, it starts off with accusations of why this happened in what we're reading about 2 Kings 24 and 25. Why did this happen? Because they violated the covenant. It wasn't God that reneged on his commitment. It's the people. And then they were warned that the nation is going down. And some of them could not accept that. And then when it happened, they were taken captive. But God said, I'm not done with you yet. They're still his people. And he is still going to restore order. As he gave them a new heart, he's going to restore the nation. And he's going to renew the covenant under the new covenant. As we have a preview of that now. But it's going to be fulfilled during the millennial kingdom. So when Jesus came to the Jews, we know that the glory came back to the temple, tabernacled in the body of Jesus Christ. But what did they do? They rejected him. So they rejected the king. So because they rejected the king, then they rejected the kingdom. They forfeited the kingdom. So what happens is God gives us the kingdom in spiritual form through the Holy Spirit. When Jesus ascends up into heaven, the Holy Spirit comes down. We receive Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit lives within us. And now you and I are children of the King. That we are now part of his kingdom. And the kingdom of God, or what we call the mystery of the kingdom, lives within us spiritually. We're not literally in the kingdom. The King is not literally here, physically here. But he is spiritually here. But one day we're going to be raptured, and we're going to come back, and then we're going to literally and physically be in the kingdom, reigning with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So that's the message of Ezekiel, a message of hope. So when you read 2 Kings and you see how bad things are getting, you know that things will be turned around. Just like in our nation, we could be looking at how bad things are. I mean, you think about the abortions that are going on. You see about the violence that is going on. You see with the confusion with the genders and people that even think they're animals now, fur babies. And the confusion is just unbelievable. And we see all the problems that we have, but the message of hope is this world is not our home. We're just passing through. We got to be like Josiah. Yes, it's only temporary, but while I'm here, I'm going to go all out for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I want to see revival it happen before the end. I want the Lord to use me now before I go to be with him. We only got a few years left. I mean, I lived out more years than I got left. When you got the energy points, I don't know when you play video games, which I haven't been able to play those in a long time, but, imagine you get so many. Before, you used to just have lives. Yeah, you had like 3 or 4 lives, and nowadays they get all kind of different charts or whatever. But however you measure it, I think I used up 3/4 already, right? You too, Robert. Brother Haggett, well, and the amazing thing is, none of us is even guaranteed tomorrow. So while we're here, instead of trying to accumulate wealth that's just going to be taken down, at some point, why don't we store up treasures in heaven? So there's a message of hope. So still one more chapter, and then we'll be done with 2 Kings. I'm not so certain if I'm going to go to 1 Chronicles after that, but we'll see. So would you bow your heads and close your eyes?